Hey, everybody, this is Chuck Marohn with Strong Towns. Welcome to our Celebrity Ask Me Anything. Joe, you're the celebrity, dude. You are in you're funny.
I'm just doing math.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Hi.
No, Joe Minicozzi, live from Asheville, North Carolina. Welcome to the broadcast, Joe.
Thanks for having me.
It's nice to see you. I haven't seen you for a couple of weeks. The last time we checked out, we were in Boston together.
Boston.
And you were headed overseas, and I was headed back home after a long week. Boy, how time flies, right?
Yeah, that was something special. Yeah, I was telling people about that experience of the folks in Mashpee essentially polluting their entire water and then complaining about it. And my favorite part was the elder from the Wampanoag tribe in the back of the room, like watching this all go down with these very self-entitled Americans complaining about the destruction of the planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then somehow they were going to get the state to pay for it. And then we went up to the State House, and you did that great show at the Harvard Law School. That was a lot of fun. So
it was kind of fun when they said that, we're just going to have to go to the Capitol and have them pay for it.
Yeah, and you got to ask them, and the senators were all like, oh.
Yeah, that true. I think it was kind of fun for me to be able to say, like, look, you're one of the most affluent places in the country. I don't think an application from Cape Cod, in Washington D.C. is going to play real well. But then when we did go to the Capitol and told them about it, they started laughing. Like, like we're gonna fund their sewer system. So we all have our delusions. So let me, just for the people who are watching, let me go over a couple ground rules here. I know that Kia's on the chat and can answer your questions too about logistics, but there's a Q&A button. If you click on that, you can put a question in there. I am going to do my best to curate those and ask them to Joe as we go along here. So get your questions in, and we'll try to answer as many as we can. Joe and I both have a hard break after 60 minutes because we both have things that we have to do immediately after. But in the 60 minutes we've got, we'll do the best that we can. Joe, I wanted to start with a couple things right off the bat. The first one being the very first kind of presentation I ever saw you make, you juxtaposed, and I think if people type in Google Joe Minicozzi, they will get this graphic. The Walmart in Asheville versus the downtown building that you were part of renovating. I'd like you to take a moment to go through that and kind of talk a little bit about just the backstory of what prompted you to actually put that graphic together. What were some of the conversations that were happening in Asheville? And how did that get you to the point where you're like, hey, look, we got to look at this a little bit differently than we are?
Sure. Can I do my screen sharing now?
If you want to do screen sharing, the only problem is that screen share doesn't work real well on podcasting, but as long as you describe what we're looking at, people won't throw stones at me.
I can describe it. Yeah. So basically, you can see my screen now. Yeah, I kind of sort of have to talk myself through the imagery. So
I think you must have like the most souped up computer of anyone I've ever seen, because you always have 50 windows open with these high graphics things going on. So
I'm a visual learner. I was working with this company, Public Interest Projects. We actually still share their space with them. And Pat Whalen is the trustee of Julian Price, who invested this money into downtown. It was mostly about making downtown livable, a lot of Jane Jacobs stuff, getting people living downtown, and then ground floor activity. But Pat was doing this case of presenting information to the community. And we have this huge PowerPoint called the Environmental and Economic Case for Urbanism. And it's just all the data that's out there that we've known about. A lot of the environmental stuff about the urbanism side was from the Department of Energy. And most of the stuff, the EPA, most of the stuff is out there. And so what we have in Asheville is people on the left that think that somehow developers are evil and buildings are destructive for the planet, even though they all live in buildings. And people on the right in this area think that downtown's subsidized, that somehow the free market wouldn't produce that if it were happening. And of course, obviously the free market's producing suburbia, so that's what the market wants. And what we were seeing is the valuation change of the city, and the city putting some investments into the downtown. So public interest projects wouldn't have invested downtown if it weren't for the city doing some things like relaxing the parking codes, doing some streetscape projects and stuff like that. But there are people that complain about, oh, that's $26 million in parking structures and sidewalks. So one of the buildings that is kind of known, if anybody's seen one of my presentations, you see me talk about this old JCPenney's building that got us, quote, subsidy, air quotes there, of a sidewalk, a garbage can, a bike rack, 2 benches, and a street tree. So basically the city committed to an urban environment, and therefore these species of birds show up saying, oh, we're going to fix buildings. So we made retail, or public interest projects did, retail on the ground floor, office, and then residential. And so, we're telling the community like, hey, that's a 3,500% increase in taxes on that same property. That's a huge gain in taxes. And then, people immediately shot back. Well, the Walmart's at $20 million. A Walmart's double the value. It's like, well, that's kind of an apples and oranges argument. When you look at the actual tax productivity, my house is producing 20,000 an acre. Our building downtown is producing 634,000 an acre, and the Walmart 6,500. So Pat was doing these analytics and basically normalizing it because he was trying to make a case. When I saw this as an urbanist and somebody's worked in this field for a couple decades, one of the things I saw immediately was like, why make a big argument? Why not just go right to the source and talk about the cash flow and leave it at that? All the other arguments fall by the wayside when you start talking about money. And it's funny. It's like we tend to like try to make a bigger argument than we need to, and what ends up happening is the audience just tunes out. Just this is too much information. I don't trust you. All of that. So I was trying to find a way to like make it more simple. So I use a lot of jokes. I talk about cash crops and marijuana versus soybeans, and what would you do? This gets a big laugh in lots of places. And even looking at the retail numbers, the retail level. A Walmart produces 47,500 in retail taxes. And again, this is based on the numbers that we had. And our building downtown kicks it up about 114,000 an acre. So the total tax gain is 51,000 for the Walmart and 414 for our building downtown. More jobs in our building. We even have more residential. So there's a slide that I just put up, and this is what I was presenting when I showed up on that panel with you, was, keep it simple, show the numbers, do the math, and explain your productivity. And, it's kind of funny. I'm sure you've been in this situation where because you talk about money and numbers, they stick you on an economics panel. So I was stuck on an economics panel with you, and I was like, oh, this is going to be boring. Because usually it's like people showing spreadsheets, and it's painful to watch the PowerPoint, lots of bullet points that people are reading. And you got up there and just decimated the road costs. And that had been the weakness of our whole argument, that we were talking about money coming out of the ground with no investment into the ground. And there you are talking about, here's our investment into the ground and we're not getting any money back. So it's like chocolate and peanut butter meeting for the first time. I was like, dude, I like your stuff. Yeah, it was kind of fun. And so we have done.
When I saw your stuff, it answered every question that I was struggling with at the time. Yeah. It really
same
did.
Here. Yeah. So
let me ask you this, and then we've got some questions I want to go to. Why? Let me phrase this the way that my local council member has. My local council member say, well, Walmart, they pay a lot of tax. They're really big. This seems like not right to make it by acre. Like, why is by acre a better way to look at it than just by block or by lot?
Well, God, I mean, acres are all that you have. So a city is a boundary of land. It's your corporate boundary, right? So the only thing that you have are acres. And when people say to me, they're like, well, Joe, you're not being fair. That Walmart's bigger, so the number is bigger. It's like, well, yeah, then if you want to be fair that way, then you need to do the same for the downtown. And you should have 34 acres of your downtown. It's like, no matter if you're being intellectually honest about this and you're being fair about your land, the downtown will always win, or anything that's 2 stories and greater, or that has some density. And then it gets down to the building cheapness factor. So, you and I went to that Assessors conference meeting in Kansas City.
Right.
When was that? 2010 or something. And it was mostly just to kind of figure out what the hell they were doing. I don't know if you remember this, but our lead slide was that picture of Ross Perot and Admiral Tilsdale. And it's like, who are we? Why are we here?
Who are we? Why are we here? Yeah.
Yeah. And, we're definitely fish out of water. And we're there just to figure out, like, how the hell do these guys operate? But what was interesting is the Walmart people were there making their case. And I think it was I kept on going a couple more years after that.
It was the year after you and I were there. I actually have the recording on my computer here because you recorded it and sent it to me.
Actually, I need to get you to send that back to me. I totally forgot that.
I've got it right here. Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead and email it to me. But that was, Sacramento. What's his name? Charles Terrell, who's the head of property tax for Walmart, was going off about showing how cheap his buildings are to the assessors. Now, assessors are agnostic. If you have a cheap building, it's a cheap building. They can't make more value in that. And the assessors are pretty rigorous about their math and how they do things. So Terrell was showing numbers about how cheap his buildings are. And I thought this was brilliant. Like, this guy's getting all of his property taxes lowered in one meeting.
Right. Pretty efficient way to do things.
Smart. Yeah. Yep. And I asked him, I said, so Mr. Terrell, what's the useful life of one of your buildings? And he immediately shot back 15 years, maybe 20. We designed that building to depreciate it down as quick as possible, build another building to move on. So just, it's not, people tend to vilify the development community. This developer's bad, that strip mall developer's bad, that Walmart developer's bad, and without seeing the context of the pool of which they're all playing. So our attitude is, don't hate the player, hate the game. That these people are playing a game in a system that we need to be in tune to. So the same level that we should be poking at standards of highway building, or the fact that that you and I had this conversation before with Nate Silver, that the thousands of permutations that the weather system uses to do hundreds of different models just to predict the weather for the next 48 hours, yet the hubris the engineering profession has to predict the traffic flow 20 years out with one model.
With a ruler and a straight line. Yeah, I know.
Yeah. So there's, humans do this. We try to simplify things, and there are massive amounts of inefficiencies that come spiraling out of these policies, most of which are unintended. There is the intentional bad stuff. Like there's a lot of businesses like Lowe's, Walmart's now in on it, but this is called the Dark Stores Initiative, where they're trying to get comps of empty buildings to be the comp of an occupied building. And it's just, that fails the basic sixth grader litmus test of, okay, if my commercial building's equal to an empty building, well, then the same should be true of my house.
Right.
But the thing is like, this stuff gets baked into state policy sometimes, and then we in the cities get stuck dealing with it. So it's not a free market at that situation.
Right. All right. Alex Pline, one of our longtime founding members, in fact, he wants to know if you have any open source, free or paid service recommendations for creating heat maps if you have the data. So this is a technical question. He's got the data. How do you create the maps? Is this something that, I got to buy Arc whatever, or is there other ways to do this?
Well, we use ESRI software, which is pricey. And that's how we get into the 3-dimensional stuff. But there are shareware versions of GIS software. I think QGIS is the biggest one out there. I'm just going to be honest with the audience here. I actually don't know how to use GIS software. So,
You're not the
it's,
technical. Yeah.
I'm not a technical person. So I'm a visual person and I'm a storyteller. So, that's more of a question for Josh or Will. So, yeah, I think QGIS is the big one. There's a lot of stuff on Mapbox that I don't quite know what that is. So
Can you talk a little bit about, and I don't want you to divulge anything. I'm not asking you to divulge anything that's proprietary, but I know you've had some discussions with the ESRI people, and I know you've had some conversations about how we could model some of this stuff and bake it into some of their analyses. They have some great plugins. Can you just talk a little bit about that, about what you see coming from the industry, and how maybe some of this might at some point become more standard?
well, it's becoming more and more standard, mostly because people are starting to be more aware of, um, the visibility that you get going from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions, the amount of information that comes out of the model. So when we show a 2D map, to go from red to purple, it's like, all right, I just went from red to purple. You don't really understand the scale of that step. So that's the reason why we advocate 3D, and it's kind of baked into our name that 3 at the end of urban is supposed to be cubed. So it's supposed to be superscript, meaning a 3-dimensional environment and 3-dimensional information. Couldn't get that one past the IRS though. So it's just urban 3. So people ask us all about, where's that 3 come from? Are you just 3 people? It's like, no, it's 3 dimensions.
Yeah.
But, there's nothing proprietary about it other than there is an art to the display of the information. That's our practice. So when this information is pumped out in 3D, there's a lot of monkeying around that happens across the entire model to make it visually read the way it's supposed to. So that's one of the hard parts about why ESRI can't standardize this, is that $1 of value in North Carolina is different from $1 of value in South Carolina. And there's all sorts of other stuff baked into the assessment policies. There's also a lot of human error. The easiest way to think about it is think of a condominium. Well, actually, let's go back to that old Penny's building.
It's astounding to me, and let me just add this while you're making that shift. It's astounding to me how much human error there is in assessment files. I mean, we actually have run into, and I don't want to disparage anyone personally. I won't mention any names, but we've run into some real like retrograde assessment offices where you have, stuff in crayon and on note cards, and in an age of technology where you should be able to map this stuff up and see these anomalies, the way that we're doing this, which literally is costing cities millions, tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars. It's just bizarre to me. It's been a real eye-opening thing for me to see how backward we are in this very critical department. So go ahead.
Well, yeah, and it's just, I would just tell all the audience, just don't be frustrated by this. And it's not a nefarious plot. There's no one out to get anybody else. It's just something that a lot of people haven't done. There are cities that are progressive, air quotes, that are super advanced. They're very proud of their planning. They're very proud of everything, and they haven't worked on their GIS for 5 or 10 years. And that's like, that's not maintaining your air filter in your car. It's like, why would you do that? So these systems have to run, and you have to constantly stay on top of the data to make it better. And there are people that are within GIS that are very frustrated by the lack of attention that they get inside government, where they're just asked to produce a zoning map, and that takes them a whopping 10 minutes to just hit the print button, right, and they get a zoning map. That's not GIS. So there's a whole field. If anybody is like a real map nerd and loves this kind of stuff, there's a whole sub profession called geodesign. That actually goes back to Ian McHarg in the 1960s, where he was promoting this kind of stuff of looking at the world through layers. And he used to do it all by hand. And I do recommend reading McHarg's Design with Nature to pretty much everybody. And he was talking about this as an economic argument, that why are we destroying the planet? It's against our own interests from an economic perspective. And we've sort of lost that conversation. So the magic of our firm is that we bring that back into into today's environment. But it's all Ian McCard.
Right. James Jones asks about sales tax, and he actually says later, I think you answer my questions with the Walmart slide, but I want to ask you a related question about sales tax. Oftentimes we get this question when I'm presenting stuff. People will say, how do you include and how do you calculate sales tax? Can you just talk about maybe a little bit the differences from state to state and region to region on how sales tax is treated and how you would account for that? And maybe even get a little bit into how we did it in Lafayette, because I thought that was the nuance that we tried to deploy in Lafayette seemed novel to me. Maybe it wasn't to you, but it seemed to me to be kind of a novel way of looking at it.
Yeah, sales tax is kind of a finicky thing. Sales tax is different in every state, and its application at a local level is different in every state. So, we can get the data at a local level. When I say local level or a parcel level, like what does Jane's beauty store make versus Joe's barbershop? In places like Colorado or California, but as a consultant, we have to sign an agreement of confidentiality that we can't display what they make, but I can show what the district that they're in makes. So if there's a strip mall area, and let's say it's a mile-long corridor coming out of town, from a planning perspective, I don't care what individual businesses do, but I care about the productivity of that land use typology, right? So from a mapping perspective, I only have to show this corridor produces this versus the downtown that produces that, and the mall that produces this. That's important in places like California and Colorado, where a lot of the retail taxes come back to the local municipality. It's also important in places like Alabama, where we can get that information. But in North Carolina, we're not allowed to get that information at all, which is mind-blowing.
Right.
Now, luckily, most of North Carolina sales taxes that are produced in Asheville go up to Raleigh at the state. The state consumes the majority of it and just does what it will in this very, you could call it socialistic, although we're all Republicans apparently, where they take our dollars and redistribute them throughout the state without any strings attached. So for every dollar that's produced in Asheville in sales tax, we get about 7 cents back. So, that doesn't even matter to measure it, So our city is, all intent and purposes, run off property taxes. Depending on where you are in the country, and there's a chart that I have up right now. It's data that we got from the Tax Policy Center, which is a national think tank that studies this stuff across the country. If you're in places like Louisiana, Alabama, Oklahoma, your municipalities run off retail taxes. If you're in a place like Maine, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, your cities pretty much run off property taxes. So it doesn't even matter to run your retail taxes. And in places like Oregon, Montana, they don't even have retail taxes. So be aware of where, if it matters or not. And then ask your finance officer. But the easiest thing to do is just pull your city's budget and just look at the revenues that come in as a proportionality test. How much money's coming in from property tax? How much is coming in from retail tax? And then start with the big stuff. Start with whatever the largest chunk of your money that's coming in. Start there. So if you're getting 40% of your city's revenue out of property taxes and 6% out of retail taxes, it's kind of foolish to have a retail tax argument. But just the majority of your money is coming from property taxes. Now, there's a whole other discussion that gets into chains versus locals, retail production. We've seen in the data that we've studied that local small mom and pops produce more per square foot. We did a study in Durango, and a coffee shop and a bookstore on Main Street were producing 5 times the retail sales per square foot of a Walmart. So we had the data, so we looked.
Right.
So that's the thing is, like, we do have some of those reports that we can pass on to you all. And the thing that I found with people is you always have to make it a local understanding. You can't show like, oh, this is what Durango did.
I also feel like the way Josh approached Lafayette, which was to not necessarily ascribe every sale to the big box store. In other words,
Yeah.
I think there was an attempt to look at, what is the family consumption rate. In other words, if the mall went away or the big box store went away, the family is still going to buy toilet
Yeah.
paper and toothpaste and this. Is that really the mall inducing those sales, or is it something else? And then, what of the mall's sales wouldn't happen but for the mall? The stuff
Yeah.
that is brought in from people coming in from the region to consume, extra consumption that people wouldn't normally do. So I feel like sales tax is this big nuance thing that is, less clear and less straightforward, but yet becomes the obsession for many cities, right?
Well, it becomes the obsession because, sometimes and I've seen this with large retailers is they actually have the data. So, I don't
Right.
blame,
Right.
the Walmart person for coming in and saying, this is the amount of sales tax we'll produce. This is the amount of property tax we'll produce. Well, they've got like 20 people with PhDs in economics that are on their staff that run these numbers. Tim Callahan, the coffee shop owner on Main Street in Durango, he's too busy working, so
Right.
he doesn't have those numbers to make that case. And on top of that, when he puts his numbers into the argument, it looks so small because he's a small shop. It's never normalized onto the per acre or per square foot basis where you start to see apples to apples. So it's the politicians tend to get seduced by big numbers, particularly when you get into the seven digits. It's like, oh, I'm in the millions now. That's exciting. But they never look at it in aggregate to see what other pieces are. And Josh, what he did with Lafayette, the real jump in logic there was people's choice was put into that model. So you choose to live where you live. So therefore, you're buying down that infrastructure that gets to your house. You're choosing where you're making your purchases, and we're going to pretty much measure that based off your income. The average discretionary income is about 30% of your total gross income. So we could measure that based on where your wealth is, where you're living, and then how do you get to your retail purchases. And you're right that I think it was Rifle, Colorado. They were really excited about a Walmart, and they asked me during the presentation. They're just like, "Well, are you saying we can't have this Walmart?" And I said, "Well, were you not able to buy toilet paper and jeans before they showed up? I mean, how did you guys survive for 200 years?"
Right.
And then on top of that, it's like, if it's worth it for you to spend 10 cents less per roll of toilet paper, great. As long as you do the math and realize the exchange that you've just put down, because you are essentially paying into that reduction through your property taxes and the fact that the average Walmart consumes all of its property taxes with the police services that they consume. So
Right.
the deal that you think you're getting and the fact that they're producing all of these property taxes is essentially a zero-sum game. You're actually losing money. And that's not us. That was Bloomberg ran that analysis. But if you talk to any police department, they'll tell you, they're like, yeah, we're always at the Walmart.
Right.
So
I've heard that. We have one police officer who just is basically Walmart duty. Yeah.
yeah. So that's what, $45,000 a year in salary. Another, go ahead and multiply it times 2.5 to add in all of their insurance, their pension. You need to have an attorney's department to handle the police department. They need to have an office. They need a car. Once you put all that in, you're looking at, for one police officer, you're looking at what, $400,000 a year.
It's a huge sum of money. I
Yeah.
actually, for me, the thing that was striking, and your data helped me see this, when I was working for the engineering firm here in town, we built the sewer and water around a whole bunch of big box stores. And these were huge dollar amounts. I mean, millions and millions of dollars being spent. And of course, the big box store would pay for it. Menards fronted the cost. Home Depot fronted the cost. Super Walmart fronted that cost. But it occurred to me that we're turning this back over to the city now to maintain. And those $1 million bills are going to come back up again in my lifetime, maybe more than once, depending on how long I'm around here. Where's the money going to come to fix this stuff? And it certainly is not going to come from that Walmart, particularly if that Walmart is only around for 15 years and turns into one of these black sites. It just occurred to me how, I guess, high risk, kind of low reward this pattern of development actually was.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask you, you've got Lancaster up, and I think it's a really good example. I did want to ask you another question from I'm scrolling down the list here, and this may relate to this one. It might not. I don't want to sidetrack you too much, but I know you've struggled with this one the way I have. And so I want to ask this one from Ethan Green. He says, have you found a particular strategy that's effective for communicating these ideas at the local level? He said, if I wanted to implement this in my city, do I just show up to public hearings? Do I write op-eds? Do I set up meetings with policymakers? What do I do to get these ideas into practice? You have been more effective than I have at this, but I know we've both struggled because we both, struggle with, how do I say this? With dumb outcomes, right? We both don't
Yeah.
suffer fools well. How do you do this? How do you take the data you've got? How do you take the information you have and the insights you have and communicate that?
Well, 65% of any audience or any group of people are visual learners. About 90% of human information comes through our eyes. I'm a graphics person. And so I see this as a level of, you have to tell a story. You can't just like roll out with like, I've done this report, and you just start dropping reports
Here's
on
the
people.
spreadsheet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
People are too busy. And in defense of elected officials, they win a popularity contest and they're managing a multi-billion-dollar corporation. I actually don't fault the politicians. I have a bigger problem when they refuse to take the information. Yeah. And I think you and I have kind of witnessed this. It's more of a frustration inside our own professions, that we're complicit
Right.
in this disinformation, that I've seen planners that can't figure out how to run a tax bill, or I see, they want to be the judge of real estate development, yet they've never built anything.
Right.
That is a huge flaw inside the planning profession. It's like, could you imagine any other profession working that way? Like, could you imagine if the judges judging figure skating never wore a pair of skates? Like, would we take them seriously? No.
Right.
And yet we've developed the system of these cops.
Or the judge at the courthouse never having had a law law degree. Right.
Yeah. So I think we need to be humble enough to question ourselves as professionals. Now, for the advocate, for the strong towner in the room, bring examples, find podcasts, and see, this is a long haul. Don't see it as I need to just overwhelm people with a mountain of evidence. You have to start small, tell a story, find a local example. There's actually some great TED Talks online on how to give a TED Talk. And I think that's actually one of the things that you and I have in common is this kind of narrative way of explaining things.
Right.
And it's not to come out and just bully the audience and shame them into feeling awful. You have to make people curious. You have to give them information and allow them to see it with new eyes. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And let me ask you this, because this is the experience that I've had. I stand up in front of crowds all the time. I will be this week in Wichita and Chattanooga, and I can see people's brains like exploding. And the reaction I get afterwards is like, oh my gosh, this changed my life. This is so important. This is so great. But then I go to my local, whatever, Rotary Club, or I go to my local city council and I say the exact same thing in the exact same way. And they're like, yeah, it's Chuck, whatever.
Yeah. I got the same problem here.
Exactly.
And frankly, I don't care. I'm presenting Wednesday, 2 days. I'm taking a project in front of the planning board, and I don't feel like it's been a fair conversation that the city's allowed, tractor trailers to happen on a residential street, yet somehow I'm the bad guy because I'm trying to point out to the community how stupid it is.
Right.
Whatever. I'll be dead in 20 years. So I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to help propel better city design. So whatever.
Kevin Shepard, another one of our founding members with Verdunity out of Dallas, along with Dennis Strait, both are asking a question about measuring liabilities. Kevin was specifically about Lafayette. Dennis just says, how do you measure liabilities against value? I want to give you a chance to answer that question. But I also want to kind of maybe while you're pulling up something here, I want to make the case for value per acre as a amazing proxy for this deeper analysis. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like the one thing that Lafayette taught us more than anything was that the value per acre mapping may not give you 100% accuracy in terms of the profit and loss of parcel by parcel, but it sure gets darn close for like a fraction of the effort. I mean, I feel like as a proxy for success, it is really onto something huge.
Well, it's value per acre. It's kind of funny. I've actually got the books sitting over here. When you and I were like killing time on our little field day up in Boston, and we went down into the Harvard Design School library, and we found all of those books from the early 1900s, and I think they were like from 1910 and 1916 and stuff like that. And one of the metrics that they had in it was value per acre analysis, and I started laughing about that. I'm like, look, we've invented the 1916s, and they also have like the most cheapest, or the most inexpensive form of transit is the sidewalk. It's like there's strong towns circa 1916. It's a really simple metric. Think of it as, miles per gallon versus miles per tank. It normalizes the information. And the first thing you want to do is normalize the information. Don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. You want to just get something out there, start the conversation, and then open the debate. The biggest thing I think from the Lafayette experience was, going back to your argument of the streets as a liability. When you and I were sitting there in front of Lori Tukes, the finance officer, and she was explaining the CAFR standards.
Right.
And then the CAFR standards, they list asphalt, the roads and pipes and all of that stuff is an asset. And they actually have a depreciation schedule, which makes it even more amazing that they actually figure out when it's going to fall apart. They just don't apply that into a reserve account for fixing it.
Right.
And that's
they just become poorer every year and like, oh, well.
How'd that happen? Why are we not meeting our capital needs?
Right.
And you were arguing with her about it. Like, why is this? And I held up my computer and said, Lori, look, my computer depreciates, but I can sell it to you. Can you sell your roads to Baton Rouge? And she goes, no. And then you just immediately snap back, Lori, that's a liability.
That's a liability. It's not an asset. Yeah.
Yeah. And like the light bulb went off for her, but she was like freaked out because like we're now taking her way outside her comfort zone, outside the CAFR standards.
Right.
And we told her, we said, look, Lori, we're not going to follow your CAFR standards. No one's going to show up from the GFOA in Chicago and give us a demerit. But in her defense, she's been practicing the best rules of her profession.
Right.
And it's sad. And since that time, I've gone to the GFOA, presented this stuff to them. I showed them the Lafayette model, and I blamed them for masking the utter collapse of every American city that's going on right now.
Right.
And it was, I was kind of, I'll admit it, I was kind of a jerk, but I was doing that to be provocative.
Right.
And it was really funny. One of the finance officers during Q&A, they were all stunned. And one of them said to me, are you against me having a big yard for my dog and I like my big yard? I said, look, sir, I honestly don't care what you have. I just want you to pay for it. And all of the other finance officers started laughing because these are the math people, right? These are the accountants.
Right.
And I think that of all of your work in strong towns and what you've initially kicked off, the ripple effect of that tremor that you started, I guess the flapping of the butterfly wings from that the first strong towns talk is that's what needs to change inside the system. We just visualize it to make it real. So, who is this Kevin Shepherd guy? I'm just kidding. So Kevin, if there's one thing you could do, it's just bring that time present into the model. So our model is a 50-year collapse of that system. So it's like, how do we take the whole thing as a whole reserve account and all that time and put that into the reserve account of the money and then project that back out? So basically it's the road you drive on, you're paying for it savings fund too.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. Instead of, I think from an accounting sense, and I sat down with an economist around the time we were working on Lafayette. I sat down and he was defending the accounting approach that cities take, and basically tried to make the case, and I think ultimately at the end there was some consensus that we should at least be tracking these liabilities as we accumulate them. If you want to have the road be an asset and then depreciate it, that's fine, but you're also have an obligation to fix this thing. I mean, that's why you're collecting taxes. So start to accrue that liability somewhere.
The thing that blows my mind about economists is like, okay, fine, yeah, you're smart. Thanks for showing me your brain and how smart you are with figuring all this stuff out. That you've got some little head of the needle that you're going to stand on and defend this thing. But can we all at least acknowledge the fact that the American city, as we know it, across the entire country, every single city is broke.
Right.
Like, it's not pensions. It can't
right.
be. That's a piece of it, but it's. If you look at any American city, how is it we can't afford basic stuff? It's like, hello, it's not because of your defensible argument that you've defended that the CAFR standards work in a certain little bubble inside a container, inside a little Ziploc bag that's inside that in that world it maybe works. But when we go outside this world, we can see that it doesn't work.
Your theory might not be actually working in the real world. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Chase Anderson, Kid asks, how can the everyday planner use their annual budget to assess the solvency of their city? And, is there a good rule of thumb for using that process to nudge you towards understanding that very situation of your going broke? If you're gonna give some advice there, what would it be, Joe?
Wow. Well, that's a good question, Chase. If there's a video online that you can probably find of, I did it at the ESRI conference, and it's the last 9 minutes of that video. We do I guess the equivalent of an opportunity cost model of different decisions in this Publix grocery store in Chattanooga. And the developer was asking to just get rid of all the zoning and just do conventional suburbia. So we ran the other alternatives of, if you did this, what would you get? And just to show the cash flow. Doing case studies like that, I find are really, really helpful. When you look at the budget on an annual basis, if there were some rules of thumb there, one is talk to your finance officer and ask them about the what they have on the depreciation schedule, and have them educate you on that, because they have again, going back to what we just talked about in the previous segment, they do have a depreciation number out there on the roads. If you want to go so far as to map that would be even better. But you're going to find that might be a little difficult because the engineering department may or may not know which streets are where, kind of thing. But I think you start getting into that practice of breaking down the barrier between finance, engineering, and planning, and making it all tie together, it would make the planning argument more strong, if that makes sense.
Why
but I
doesn't
think that would apply. Go ahead.
Well, that seems. I hear what you're saying. It seems very common sense. Why doesn't this happen in government? Why does the finance director come forth with a 1-year budget, and has done that by asking the planning department for their budget, and the engineering department for their budget, and the parks department for their budget? Why is this not a more holistic approach?
Well, I think there's got to be an answer in there somewhere. I think that for me right now, the best thing that I can figure out is I think this is the end result of modernism. That postmodernism is now making its way into government. But if you think about modernism, it was all about the division of labor, the division of sciences. It's about analytics, drilling down and finding what is art. Well, we can create this thing called modern art, which is an abstraction of art, and distills it down to just a couple of lines on a piece of paper. Then that becomes art, right? It doesn't have to have all the other stuff. Before the modern movement, if you pull like the city books that we were talking about earlier from the early 1900s, they crossed the gamut of economics, engineering, design, human quality. It's just all messy in there. but modernism broke it apart. And so when I went to work in government and I was a zoning administrator for the downtown of West Palm Beach, it was a waste of my time to be hanging out with the public works department or the finance department because I didn't understand what the hell they were talking about. And
Right.
plus it didn't apply to me because I got zoning to take care of. And to be honest with you, most of planners that I see, they're stuck in this process treadmill. A lot of it is of their own making. I hate to admit it, they make
Yep.
lots of crazy processes that make things even more and more complex. And then they hate the complexity, but yet they're the ones that are holding the steering wheels.
Right. Right.
So I think those are the things that need to be owned up to. I was just at the APA conference.
Oh, were you in New Orleans?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't look enthused, Joe.
Yeah. I think as a profession, we need to own the fact that we're kind of off the rails.
Yeah.
There were so many, like the conference sessions on inclusionary zoning and basically the punitive stuff of planning. How do we beat the snot out of a developer
To get what we want. Right.
Yeah, it was like super, super packed. And what was frustrating is, like, do you even understand how development happens? And that, inclusionary zoning is the economic effect of some other policies that are in place, which is it's very difficult to get a piece of real estate in your town in Seattle. Yet you and I could drive through Seattle and see plenty of surface parking lots all around the city.
Right.
So the other economic factors at play that maybe we should have at the table. And it's frustrating to watch an organization like Lincoln Land Institute push for changes in the tax system, yet we in planning don't quite understand how to pull that off. So we'll just pick up another club to beat somebody with in inclusionary zoning. So, okay, I've gotten off topic, but what I'm getting to is that we become our own problem when we allow our own processes to become difficult. We don't have those conversations.
Right. Right. I do think that you're right on with the modernism part and the fact that basically in the name of, from a government standpoint, efficiency, we've created processes that are, separate from each other and don't really function. I tell city governments, actually, I feel like you need to get more, you need to get messier. Like your process needs to actually get slower in a way, and it will give you better outcomes. In other words, instead of streamlining everything and getting a bunch of dumb outcomes, make it a little bit slower, more collaborative and a little more level, and you will get maybe not quite as quick an approval, although in some places, that's bizarre too, but you'll get better outcomes.
Well, in the form-based code that I managed in West Palm Beach, I think the fastest zoning permit I gave was 15 minutes.
Right. Right.
Because we basically had a pre-approved document in the master plan, and we drew. Well, I didn't draw it, but Dwayne Plater Zyberg drew the whole damn downtown out, and then we coded off that image. So if you came close to the image, it's like, good, you're done, out the door. And I remember the planners that I worked with used to treat me differently, and they're like, "Oh, you're a designer. You're not a planner." And I was like, "No, what I have is still a zoning code. It's still a volume. But I think that what Strong Towns is doing that's awesome, and I don't know if this was part of your nefarious plot to overthrow the world, but is to get people to think like generalists and to mainstream that information and get outside your comfort realm. So for any outside of the activists, for any citizen, any strong towner that's in government, get outside your comfort realm. Go and take a course in finance, or go and try something different. Go to a different conference outside of the APA. Go to a GFOA conference or an Assessors conference or something to try to shake up your thinking about how planning works as a professional.
Well, you keep sending me all these planning books, and they're the only planning books that I've read in the last 15 years. So you keep getting me to read these like 1910 road design books or whatever. Let me ask you this. Scott Englander wants to know kind of a practical question. He said, are you aware of any cities or towns that encompass both urban and suburban areas that differentiate their tax rates between the two to help offset the cross subsidy? And I would just expand that to say, are you aware of anybody who does this in any way, whether it's utility bills or, district fees or anything like that? Are you aware of any government who actually allocates their revenues in this way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for I think where Scott's going with this question, probably Canadians would be the best example. I don't know if I don't know if Scott can type in where he lives, but one of the things that I find is our painful illiteracy with the Canadians and how they operate. And I would recommend that anybody chat with a Canadian and see how they do things. They are different, and yet somehow they speak the same language as us, and they look just like us too. But the Canadians apply that inside their tax system. But at a basic level, most municipalities in their water rates charge differential rates. So you'll see, what I think what we'll start to see is more of a fee-based structure where it comes from the water or utilities where they start to charge that. And it again, that depends on the utility as well. But mostly like you can just go up the street here to Weaverville, North Carolina, a town of 12,000 people, and they've got, or 6,000 people, and they've got differential water rates. So that's the basis for how you would apply it at a property tax basis. At a property tax level, the Canadians are the ones that are really charging that differential rate.
So when we looked at the sewer bills in Lafayette, one of the things we found was that everybody was paying the same bill for a standard residential home, even though you were way out on the edge and you had to get your sewage pumped a dozen times versus, when you're in the core and it just flowed by gravity. I've never seen anybody address that issue. Have you seen anyone try to take that one on and charge those people out on the edge more because they simply cost way more?
I haven't seen it yet, but that was our recommendation to Lafayette, was to, if your sewerage has to go through 14 different lift stations, then you should pay for a little piece of each of the 14.
Yeah, maybe one pay more, right?
Yeah, and so and the thing was, allowing us to go through that process and explaining that to the community, help them have that conversation. Now, I haven't circled back to Lafayette to figure out whether or not they've applied it.
My understanding is they've not applied that, but
yeah, well, that's the politics.
Speaking of Lafayette, we have a question here from our friend Pat, who I've stayed at his place. I don't know if you got that pleasure or not. Pat wants to know, why would a broke county or parish ever approve another permit for a development out on the edge that requires the county to maintain the infrastructure? How do you get staff and electeds to understand the high cost of free money? I think there's a little hyperbole in the first one. But I hear his frustration. Why is this, at this point, when you have the data and you have the math, why do we keep doing harmful things to ourselves, Joe?
Because we're humans.
Psychologist. Because we're human.
Yeah. We're hairless apes operating with quirky behavior. We do destructive things. You and I, people ask me all the time, like, what books do you read? And I start rattling off all of the behavioral books that I'm reading. And you do the same. One of the conferences I crashed, I think I came up and visited you in Minneapolis. So it was the Behavior Analysts.
It was.
Applied Behavior Analysis International. It was a behaviorist conference. And I crashed their subcommittee called BAS, Behavior Analysts for Sustainable Societies. And they explained it. It's called delayed discounting or temporal discounting, but basically as hairless apes, we're really good at ignoring today's pain and discount it out in the future. So the example they gave me was a 20-year-old smoking cigarettes. And they said that, a 20-year-old's not going to quit. They're going to tell you, I'm not addicted. I'm going to quit when I'm 40. I'm going to be that 180-year-old that still smokes, because the pleasure of that nicotine buzz is greater than the feeling of pain. Now, if you actually felt the lung cancer as you smoked on that cigarette, you'd be more apt to quit. So the thing that we tried in Lafayette was making that bloody, drippy model of all of the costs. And that was a very deliberate move to visually convey the economic pain. And Pat, who's in Lafayette, knows the results of that, that even with that, even showing them the lung cancer, the community's having a hard time getting off that addiction. So the carrots that are out there are still too great for that developer to continue to go out to the edge because the system hasn't fully collapsed. It's just the roads are still there. They're a little bumpy, the flooding. They just had, y'all in Lafayette, you just had this massive friggin' flood, and that flood should have been your harbinger to stop the behavior. But
it's like the palpitation that should have warned you of the impending heart attack, right?
But, this is where you get into Machiavelli. There's too many people that make too much money doing the wrong thing, and it's hard to convince them all to change their behavior. So how do you reset the reward system so that they can change? I've had a lot of people tell me, where was I? Just last week, and probably tomorrow when I go to Naples, they find the one developer who's made all this money doing the exact wrong thing, and they want me to somehow convince that person to change their ways. And I just tell them, I'm like, look, this person has made so much money doing the exact wrong thing. They're conditioned that this is success, right? They've got all the trappings of success. They drive an expensive car. They get paid a lot of money for doing the wrong thing. Why would they do something different? So until we start changing that economic model and allow people to still make their money, but doing the right thing for the community, I think that's going to be the key thing.
Let me ask you this as a follow-up to that. And I think this is probably, and I apologize to everybody who's got a question in there. This may have to be the last one. Pam Zedak wants to know, have you found that towns, cities in distress or crisis are more open? And I'm assuming the question is more open to the data and the analysis and seeing things differently. How would you answer that one, Joe?
The short answer is yes. They still have a hard time. We saw this in South Bend, Indiana, Buffalo, New York, Syracuse, New York. These are places that don't have the economic strength of, let's say, Atlanta or West Palm Beach, Florida. But there is again back to human behavior, a quirk in there. Generally, people that are broke, and it's just, think of being human. When you're out of work, you're probably not going to have that $5 a day latte habit, right?
Right.
You're going to make better kitchen table economic choices. When you're making money hand over fist, oftentimes people don't evaluate why that's happening. And so we find that it's easier to work with people that are struggling a little bit. Lancaster, California is doing a phenomenal job because they're way out in the middle of nowhere outside of Los Angeles, in the edge of Los Angeles County, and they know their limitations. So they're at the level of, okay, we need to make smarter decisions. We saw that in places like Peoria. At Peoria, Illinois, we modeled their retail taxes. That was the first time any city in the state of Illinois had modeled their retail tax production.
Right.
I think there's bigger cities than Peoria in Illinois, like Chicago, and they haven't done it. So, kudos to Peoria for stepping out there and saying, how's this all work? But, there's like, I don't know if you've ever read any Richard Thayer.
Oh, yeah.
Nobel. Yes. He calls it gambler theory.
Right.
So when somebody wins $100, they go in with $100 and that's play money to play at the casino, and they win $100. They put that first $100 in their pocket, and it's called my money. The second $100 is called house money, and they mentally change the risk on that second $100.
Right.
Well, it's still $100. Why should I just change the risk on it just because it came from the casino? It's still mine now. I should be as protective of that. But that's when you see that, the house money effect. That's like what you see in Phoenix or Dallas or whatever, where magically people show up there because of whatever, oil or retirement or something. And the communities feel like they've done something good to earn that. And oftentimes they had nothing to do with it. At the other end of the spectrum is when people are down to their last dollar, like Buffalo. I shouldn't say Buffalo, maybe let's say Niagara Falls, New York. And what ends up happening in that situation is you have this memory of you had that $100 when you walked in, but now I've frittered away that $99. I'm down to that last dollar. Sometimes what's really sad is when you see them just go, screw it, just a buck. What do I care?
Right.
And they're willing to throw this Hail Mary pass on something. So you see this in my hometown where they tore down the downtown and built that wooden fort that you and I walked around, or you see what's going on in Utica, New York right now, where they're tearing out, was it 34 acres of their downtown to build a stupid hospital?
Gutting the downtown. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think there's a magic solution anywhere. And I think that anybody that's at the other end of this podcast, just be patient, try, bring information forward, learn, question your own biases, and put your biases out there. Just say these are my biases going in. Let's have a discussion about it. I want to hear your biases, and challenge your elected official, your government staff, whomever, to their biases, and to have an honest conversation and bring data into the conversation.
My apologies to everybody whose question we didn't get to. Obviously, we only have an hour, and we could do this for a long, long time. Joe,
we could do another one.
We could do another one. I think we will do another one.
Okay.
Dude, I love you. Thanks for taking the time to do this. Before we're done, on the way out, I know there's no, don't do that. There's no official like release, and I don't want you to, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can you tease us a little bit about the side project you sequestered yourself on a few weeks back and went and did some writing in the hills and came back? Are you working on something, Joe? Something
trying to work on a book, which, as you know, is not easy. Plus, I'm not much of a writer. I'm more of a talker. But the working title is called Growing Broke right now. So it's how communities grow, but grow in a way that's kind of drives themselves broke. But it's a lot of the lessons that we've discovered along the way. Some of the stories of data. And I get asked a lot, and you get asked all the time that when you present, they get excited and they want more information. And I kind of feel bad that I just kind of roll on to the next town and I don't have an object that has this all collected in it. And plus we have really, really cool graphics. The team here is amazing. They produce incredible stuff. So we need to have a full color. I want to do it as a pop-up book with like the models popping out, but that's too expensive.
Well, let's get going, because you and I have an interview in like 3 minutes. Can you do something for me? Can you pressure Josh to do one of these? I know he hates like being on camera. He hates like public speaking. And the audience would have to cut him a little bit of slack, because he is kind of one of these hermits that, likes to be off in a dark room by himself. But it's so much fun to pick Josh's brain, and I would love to let people do that.
Sure. Yeah, no, we'll get Josh on it. It'd be even more fun to like ply him with some whiskey and let him do some Scottish accents. But, we'll work on that.
All right.
We'll pull him out of his shell. That'd be good. All right. Thanks for your time.
Yep. I'll see you in Savannah. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it's great seeing you too.
Take care, friend.
Keep it up.
Thank you.
Take care, you too. Bye.
Bye. Thanks everybody for hanging out with us, and keep doing what you can to build strong towns. We'll see you next time.